Today I want to share a story so quietly devastating it lingers long after the last word unfolding across the frozen plains of the Wild West, where winter tested every soul. This was a land where destiny crossed paths in the harshest moments, and where looking away was often easier than doing what was right. It started with a small, desperate request, one that forced a hardened rancher to choose between turning his back or changing everything. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The winter of 1888 did not arrive in the Wyoming Territory quietly. It came down like a verdict already passed. For 3 straight days, the sky stayed locked in a dull, iron-gray sagging low over the broken teeth of the Tetons until it finally split open. When the snow came, it did not drift gently. It slammed sideways in relentless sheets, swallowing the horizon and bleaching the land into a featureless white abyss. In the remote settlement of Blackwood Crossing, the storm forced every soul into hiding. The main street had turned into a slick ribbon of ice and churned slush, the wooden boardwalks glazed and dangerous. Buildings leaned toward one another as if for warmth, their windows glowing faintly with yellow kerosene light, like stranded vessels adrift on a frozen sea. The wind screamed through the cracks in the timber, carrying the sound of hunger and the kind of cold that could still a man's heart without warning. Caleb Boone understood that cold. He had lived with it long enough to know its moods. A rancher 20 miles north of nowhere, he was a man carved by distance, sparing with words, and accustomed to needing little. He had ridden into town 2 days earlier for supplies, planning to leave before the weather turned. The storm had decided otherwise. Now, with the wind easing but the temperature falling hard, he knew waiting was no longer an option. His cattle were alone on the high pasture, and the weight of that knowledge bit deeper than the frost. Caleb pushed open the thick oak door of the boarding house, where he had ridden out the worst of the blizzard. The cold struck him like a hammer, tearing the breath from his lungs. He lowered his hat and pulled his heavy buffalo hide coat tight around his shoulders. He was tall, broad, through the chest, marked by a life that had never offered favors. His face bore the grain of old leather, his eyes flint gray and habitually narrowed against wind and sun alike. The town lay unnervingly still. It was a living place that felt abandoned. The saloon stood locked and dark, the general store shuttered. Caleb's boots broke the silence as they crushed into packed snow while he headed toward the livery stable where his roan stallion was kept. His thoughts were already counting the hours it would take to carve a trail home. He did not expect to cross paths with anyone. In weather like this, only fools and wolves wandered abroad. Then, as he passed the narrow gap between the bank and the blackened smithy, something cut through the wind. A sound thin, strained, unmistakable. It was not the storm. It was a voice. Human. Female. Shaking with a desperation sharp enough to stop him cold. "Sir, please." Caleb halted. His hand brushed the revolver at his hip out of instinct leftover reflex from war and long trails, but he did not draw. He turned, scanning the snow-packed shadows along the walls. At first there was only darkness, then a shape separated itself from it. She stepped into the weak spill of moonlight breaking through the clouds. Surprise flickered through Caleb, though he kept his face set. She was not what he had expected. Among wool coats, leather vests, and denim, she looked like she belonged to another world entirely. She was Chinese, her features fine and sharp, framed by jet-black hair gone loose and wet with melting snow. But it was her clothing that held his gaze. She wore a silk chipao, once bright, perhaps red or gold, now dulled to a rusted stain of dirt and wear. The hem was shredded, the fabric torn open to reveal layers of ragged cloth beneath useless against the cold. Her body shook so violently her teeth clattered together, the sound dry and hollow like bones knocking in the wind. A threadbare shawl clung to her shoulders, so thin and eaten through it offered no more defense than lace against a blizzard. She looked as if the world had pushed her to its farthest edge and left her there swaying, one gust away from being erased. "I'm sorry to stop you," she said. Her English carried an accent, but was steady enough, though her voice trembled as she struggled to keep her jaw from shaking. She hesitated, swallowing hard. What she needed to say was something no mother should ever be forced to voice. Caleb Boone did not answer right away. His eyes dropped to her hands, red cracked, clenched so tightly at her sides, the knuckles had gone pale. Then he met her gaze. Her eyes were dark with exhaustion, rimmed raw from tears, yet burning with a fierce resolve that refused to break. "You're freezing," Caleb said, his voice rough, unused to conversation. "You shouldn't be standing out here." She shook her head quickly and took a step closer. Snow crunched beneath shoes far too thin for the weather. "Please," she said, "don't walk away." "I tried." She went on, words spilling faster now. "I went to the shopkeeper. I went to the barkeep. They shouted at me." She swallowed again, her throat tightening. "They told me to leave. My daughter, she hasn't eaten in 3 days." The words twisted something deep in Caleb's gut. He knew hunger. He had seen it in war camps in drought-starved cattle with hollow eyes. But hearing it from a mother standing in the snow dressed in silk, meant for summer gardens or palaces, never for a frontier winter, struck him like a blow to the chest. "I can't find work," she said quickly, as if afraid he might turn away mid-sentence. "This town, they won't hire a Chinese widow. They look at me with hatred." Or worse, she added, drawing a shaky breath, her eyes locking onto his. "Cowboy. Rancher. Please," she said, "hire me for one night." Caleb stiffened. The words hung between them heavy with the wrong kind of meaning. She saw it in his face and raised her hands at once, palms open. "No, not like that. Please don't misunderstand. I still have my dignity," she said quietly, "even if I have nothing else. I mean work, honest work. I can clean, I can sew, I can cook, I can tend your horse, mend your gear, anything you need. Just one night's pay," she pleaded. "Enough for a hot meal for my child. Enough to keep the cold from taking her." Caleb studied her closely. He searched for lies, for the kind of trick life had trained him to expect. He found none. What he saw was a terrifying, unguarded truth. She was proud. He could see it in the straight line of her spine, even as her body shook uncontrollably. She was begging, yes, but with the bearing of someone who had once known worth and refused to forget it. "What's your name?" Caleb asked, his voice softening despite himself. "Malin Carter," she whispered. "My daughter is Lily Carter." She braced for rejection. She had heard it again and again over the past day. "We don't want your kind here." She waited for him to say it too. "Move along. There's no work for you." That was what she expected him to say. Or worse, laughter and offer soaked in filth, or a silent turn into the night. Instead, Caleb Boone let out a slow breath, white vapor dissolving into the dark. He tipped his chin toward the livery stable at the far end of the street. "Come with me. Both of you." Malin Carter blinked, snow settling on her lashes. You will hire me." "I'm not the kind of man who lets a child starve," Caleb said evenly. "And I'm not the kind who takes advantage of a woman cornered by the cold. I'll pay you for the work you named." "Fair pay," he added. "But first, we're getting out of this wind before it kills you right where you stand." She searched his face, braced for cruelty out of habit. Finding only a hard, honest resolve, she nodded. A sob slipped free before she could stop it. She turned and hurried toward the dark recess beneath the abandoned smithy. Caleb followed his long strides, closing the distance quickly. Tucked beneath the smithy's overhang, hidden behind a pile of rotting crates, lay a bundle of rags. As Malin reached it, the bundle stirred. A small face emerged, pale as frost eyes, wide with fear. "Mama," the child whispered. She could not have been more than 6. "It's all right," Lily Malin said softly, dropping to her knees in the snow and gathering her up. "It's all right." The girl weighed almost nothing, too light, frighteningly light like a bird hollowed out by winter. "This man," Malin said quietly, holding her close. "He's going to help us." Something in Caleb's chest tightened hard. He unfastened his heavy buffalo hide coat, and before Malin could object, draped it around both mother and child. The coat swallowed them whole, holding the heat of his body inside its thick folds. "Let's go," Caleb said. "The livery's right there." The smith keeps a stove lit in the tack room. They moved together in silence, the towering rancher in flannel and vest, cutting through the cold, and the woman clutching her child wrapped in a coat that smelled of horses, tobacco, and safety. Inside the livery stable, the cold lingered but lost its bite. The air was dry, protected from the wind. The scent of hay and manure hung heavy and familiar. A lantern near the tack room cast a warm, golden pool of light. Caleb guided them inside. The room was cramped, crowded with saddles, bridles, and jars of hoof oil. At its center sat a pot-bellied stove glowing faintly with steady heat. "Sit," he said, pointing to a wooden bench, his voice gentler now. Malin sat pulling Lily into her lap. The child shook uncontrollably, her lips tinged blue. Caleb asked no questions. He crossed to his saddlebags hanging on a rail and rummaged through them until he found what he needed: dried beef jerky, a small loaf of bread, and a tin of peaches he had meant to save for Christmas. He drew his knife, the blade flashing in the lantern light. Malin stiffened at once, pulling Lily closer, fear flaring in her eyes. Caleb noticed. He slowed, turning the knife in his hand and using the handle to pop the tin's seal. "Easy," he said quietly. "Just opening supper." He cut the bread and jerky, then set the food and peaches in front of them. "Eat." "Slow," Caleb said quietly. "Too fast and you'll make yourself sick." Lily hesitated, looking from the food to her mother. Malin Carter nodded, tears finally breaking free and sliding down her cheeks. The child ate with desperate hunger, peach juice streaking her chin. Malin watched closely, taking only small pieces of bread for herself, still putting her daughter first. "Thank you," Malin whispered, her voice thick and unsteady. "You don't understand. You don't know what this means." "It's only food," Caleb Boone replied, leaning back against the doorframe, arms crossed. He watched them in silence as a weight settled onto him, something close to responsibility. "You said you wanted work," he went on. "My saddle's got a torn stirrup strap, and my coat, the one you're wearing, has a rip in the lining. If you can mend those, I'd say you've earned your pay for the night." The repairs didn't matter to him. What mattered was that she didn't feel like she was taking charity. He saw the pride still holding her upright. Malin nodded at once. "I'll fix them," she said quickly. "I'll make them like new. And I'll brush your horse." "I know horses. My husband worked supply trains before the mines," she added. "We had horses," your husband Caleb asked. "Is he? He's gone," Malin said softly. "The coal mines." She lowered her gaze. "There was a collapse 2 months ago. Many men died. He was one of them." After a pause, she continued. "The company forced us out of the camp. Said the housing was only for workers. We went from town to town, but the exclusion laws, the anger." Her voice faltered. "People don't want to see a Chinese woman unless she's selling herself." Caleb finished grimly. She nodded, shame flickering across her face. "I wouldn't," she said. "I would rather freeze." But when Lily stopped crying from hunger and went quiet, that's when I knew I had to beg. Caleb looked at the girl, now finished with the peaches leaning heavily against her mother eyelids drooping. The stove's warmth and the food were finally doing their work. "You're safe here tonight," Caleb said. "The hostler drinks too much, but he sleeps hard. He won't bother you. I'll take the loft. You stay here by the stove. Lock the door from the inside." Malin looked at him. Gratitude and confusion tangled together. "But the work," she said. "I must earn the money." "You'll do the mending in the morning," Caleb replied. "Rest now. You both look like you walked halfway across the world." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Why, she asked. "Why do you help us, Mr. Caleb?" he said. "Just Caleb." He paused, glancing into the dark stable where the horses shifted in their stalls. "Because I've been cold," he said. "And I've been hungry, and no one should have to sell their soul just to stay alive in a land this wide." He climbed the ladder to the hayloft. Below him he heard the tack room latch click shut. Lying back in the hay, pulling a spare horse blanket over himself, Caleb found sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled outside as he lay awake, thinking of the woman and child below, and the dangerous, hopeful idea that had begun to take root in his mind. Morning arrived in a blaze of white light that stung the eyes. The storm had burned itself out, leaving the land scrubbed raw and buried beneath nearly 3 feet of untouched snow. Sunlight shattered across icicles hanging from the stable eaves, throwing sparks of brightness in every direction. Caleb Boone climbed down from the loft ladder and stopped short. The tack room door stood open. Inside the stove had been fed its heat, steady and alive. Malin Carter was already awake. She had found needle and thread in his saddlebags. Caleb always carried a small repair kit, and she was finishing the last careful stitches on his heavy coat. When she sensed him there, she looked up. She looked changed. The exhaustion still traced faint lines around her eyes, but the fear that had haunted her the night before was gone. Her hair had been gathered and braided neatly back. Her silk dress, though torn and worn, had been brushed clean of mud and straw. "The stirrup is fixed," she said, nodding toward the saddle on its stand. "And the coat is finished. I found some oil," she added. "The leather was dry, so I treated it." Caleb examined the work. The stitching was tight and precise, finer than anything his own hands could manage. The saddle leather shone softly. "You've got skilled hands," he said. "My mother taught me embroidery," Malin replied, a faint, bitter-sweet smile touching her mouth. "Silk, mostly. Leather is rougher, but the needle listens the same." Nearby, Lily Carter sat atop a stack of grain sacks, idly looping a piece of string around her fingers. She glanced up at Caleb and offered a shy, uncertain wave. He nodded back, surprised by the warmth that stirred in his chest. "The road's going to be bad," Caleb said after a moment, "but I'm heading out. My ranch is a day's ride north through the pass." Malin's face fell. The truth of mourning settled heavily on her. The night was over. The work was done. She rose and handed him his coat. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she said softly, "for the food, for the warmth. I hope the work was worth the pay you promised." Caleb took the coat but made no move toward his money pouch. Instead, he studied her, then the child. "You can't stay here," he said plainly. "This town won't treat you any better today than it did yesterday. And that dress, no offense," he added, "but that silk will be your burial cloth if you face another winter night in it." Malin wrapped her arms around herself. "We have nowhere else to go," she said. "We'll try the next town." "The next town's 40 miles out," Caleb replied. "You won't make it." He drew a slow breath. Caleb Boone was a man who guarded his solitude. He liked the quiet of his ranch, the way evenings passed without interruption. But when he looked at Lily, he saw the faces of children he hadn't been able to save during the war. And when he looked at Malin, he saw a strength as unyielding as the mountains themselves. "Pack your things," he said. Malin blinked at him. "Pack?" she asked. "We have nothing to pack." "Then get the girl," Caleb Boone said. "I'm not leaving you here," where Malin asked, hope and fear colliding in her voice. "Where are you taking us?" "My ranch," Caleb replied. "But first we're stopping at the Crossing Way Station. It's run by an older couple, Eli Boone and Ruth Boone. Good people," he went on. "Winter's hard on them. Ruth's joints trouble her, and she needs someone who can sew, cook, and help around the place. Eli could use another pair of hands with the livestock." He wasn't lying, at least not fully. Eli and Ruth were his nearest neighbors, 5 miles from his own cabin, and they had been like family to him for years. Still, Caleb knew he needed help, too. Taking Malin there first felt right. It would give her safety and dignity. You'd take us there?" Malin asked, stunned. "You'd vouch for us for a Chinese widow. I'll vouch for anyone who works." "Honest," Caleb said. "Don't matter where you're from. Matters what you do." He saddled his roan stallion with practiced ease. Then he lifted Lily Carter, setting her carefully in front of the saddle horn. The girl gasped, fingers clutching the horse's mane, but Caleb's steady hand kept her from slipping. "Hold on tight, little one," he murmured. He turned to Malin. She hesitated, eyeing the high stirrup. Caleb laced his fingers together, offering her a step. She placed her foot in his hands, and he hoisted her up behind the saddle. She settled awkwardly, her hands hovering, unsure where to rest them. "Best hold on to me," Caleb said as he swung into the saddle. "Snow's deep, and Rome can be skittish." She wrapped her arms around his waist, tentative at first, then firmer, pressing her cheek against the thick buffalo hide coat. She felt small and fragile against his back, yet Caleb could feel the tight strength in her arms, the stubborn will to survive. They rode out of the stable into the blinding white of morning. Behind them, the town slowly came alive. Faces appeared in windows. A man sweeping the boardwalk stopped, spat tobacco juice into the snow, and sneered. "Hey, Boone," he shouted. "What are you doing carting off that baggage?" "You gone soft." Caleb drew the horse to a halt. He turned slowly, fixing the man with a cold, steady stare. His hand rested casually near his hip. He said nothing. The silence stretched thick, heavy, dangerous. The man shifted, suddenly uncomfortable, then bent back to his sweeping as if the ice had become urgently important. Caleb clicked his tongue, and the horse moved on. Malin tightened her grip. "Don't mind them," Caleb said quietly. "Small minds in a big country." The journey was slow and punishing. Snow drifted deep enough in places to brush the horse's belly. They moved at a careful pace, the only sounds the animal's labored breathing and the wind whispering through pine branches. Yet, for the first time in months, Caleb did not feel alone. He felt the warmth of the child resting against him, and the woman riding close behind. At midday, they stopped beside a frozen creek to give the horse a rest. Caleb brushed snow from a fallen log so they could sit. He shared the last of the jerky, then looked out across the endless white. "You said your husband worked the railroad," Caleb said quietly. "Yes," Malin Carter said. "He came chasing the gold mountain like so many others. What he found instead was iron and dynamite. He worked for the Central Pacific. He was a good man. He dreamed of owning land. A place where we could grow vegetables," she said quietly, "and raise joy and peace." "That sounds like a fine dream," Caleb Boone said. "Dreams are heavy things to carry when you're alone," she answered softly. "You aren't alone right now," Caleb said. The words lingered between them, surprising him as much as they did her. They reached the way station as the sun slipped behind the mountains, turning the snowfields violet and gold. Smoke curled from the chimney of a sturdy log cabin. Eli Boone and Ruth Boone stepped onto the porch as Caleb rode in. Age had etched deep lines into their faces, but their eyes were sharp and kind. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron, staring in surprise at the riders. Caleb Eli called out, puzzled. What in creation? Caleb dismounted and helped Malin down, then carefully lifted Lily Carter from the saddle. The child slept soundly, limp with exhaustion. Eli, Ruth Caleb said evenly, this is Malin Carter and her daughter Lily. They need work, and they need a place to stay. Malin's the finest seamstress I've seen, and she's willing to work harder than any two men I know. Ruth studied the woman in the torn silk dress, shivering in the cold dusk. Then she looked at the sleeping child. Finally, she looked at Caleb, at the way he stood slightly in front of them, guarding without posturing. Ruth asked no questions about race. She asked nothing about the past. She came down the steps and wrapped a thick wool shawl around Malin's shoulders. Well, don't stand there freezing, she said gently. The stew's on, and it's getting cold. Bring the child inside. Malin turned to Caleb, tears rising again. You saved us. No, Caleb said quietly. You saved yourself. You knocked on the door of the dark and refused to let it swallow you. Weeks slipped into a month. Winter kept its grip on the land, but inside the way station and often at Caleb's ranch, there was warmth. Malin proved to be everything she had promised and more. She repaired every torn garment in Ruth's house. She cooked meals that turned plain frontier fare into rich, fragrant dishes, using herbs she discovered tucked away in the cellar. Lily gained weight, her cheeks rounding her laughter, filling the long winter nights with light. Caleb came by often. At first he told himself it was to help Eli with heavy work. Then he admitted it was to check on them. Eventually he stopped lying to himself. He came because he wanted to see her. One evening Caleb found Malin in the barn, brushing Rome. The horse, usually wary of strangers, stood perfectly still, head lowered, as she spoke to him softly in Cantonese. He likes you, Caleb said, leaning against the stall door. Malin startled, then smiled. She wore a simple calico dress Ruth had given her, but a strip of red silk from her old dress had been stitched into the collar, a quiet reminder of who she was. He's a good horse, she said. He just needs a gentle hand. Like his owner, Caleb Boone said with a short, quiet laugh, his gaze dropping to his boots. I've been called plenty of things, Malin. Gentle's not one of them. She stepped closer, the lantern's glow flickering across her dark eyes. Then people haven't looked closely enough. I see you, Caleb, she said. I see the man who stopped in the snow. I see the man who took off his coat for a stranger. I see the man who saved my child. I only did what was right, Caleb muttered, heat creeping up his neck. Many men know what's right, Malin replied, her voice low but unyielding. Few choose it. She reached for his hand. Her fingers were small, calloused now from work, but warm. She lifted his hand and pressed it gently to her cheek. Caleb froze. His heart battered his ribs like a trapped bird. You gave us a life, Malin whispered. Maybe Caleb said, his voice rough. Maybe you gave me one too. He turned his hand, threading his fingers through hers. He didn't step back. He didn't retreat to the silence of his empty cabin. He stayed. Outside, the wind screamed hurling snow against the barn walls, a reminder that the world beyond was hard and merciless. But inside the circle of lantern light, the lone rancher and the widow stood together, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt the cold. Caleb understood then that he wasn't riding away again. Not from them. Not from this. Winter would loosen its grip. Snow would melt. Spring would come. and when it did, he would not meet it alone. The wandering was finished. He had found something worth staying for. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso Legal Bara Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development. The emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.